Welcome back to Lunch with Steel, and today we get something a little bit different. Teens and the internet, man. I had a homie who posed a dope question just to the social space on X, otherwise known as Twitter, and I felt like it would be an interesting convo to have, especially with like a Lunch with Steel, which I get into some personal stuff, mostly gaming related content, but I like to throw a little personal bag in there too. I'm not going to say who it was from, just in case he wants to remain anonymous. I know he, is online or whatnot. But essentially, the premise of it was, for those who have teens out there, would you allow your teen to have Twitter, X? But I'm going to apply it to just any form of social media, right? It's always going to be an interesting conversation because it's hard to say what's right, what's wrong. Of course, you can have evidence for one way or the other. I know this for sure. There's only so much that you can hide the world from your kid, whether they're a teen, whatever age there is. I do think that there are kind of age brackets where you start introducing certain things, right? But I do think as early as you can, and every kid is different, but as early as you feel it is fit, you do have to make your kids aware or your teens aware about the internet space, right? Now, luckily, for people like myself, millennials, people who grew up in the 90s or you were born in the 90s, you know what life was like before the internet and you know what life was like with the internet, right? Now, unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, kids like myself, because I grew up with the internet, with it starting and everything else, there was a lot that even my parents did not quite understand about what was out there. Social media sites, MySpace, Black Planet, a lot of the messaging systems, AIM, what else? Yahoo Messenger, BET chats. There was just a lot of that stuff that existed back then that we ended up getting acquainted with. Right, a lot of that stuff was meant for older folks, and I'd be honest with y'all, I was probably interacting with a lot of that stuff around the age of 10. Right, as soon as I got access to computers, I finally got to get online and do certain things. Right, my parents, and a lot of the older folks didn't know what to be aware of. Now, for me, there were things that I ended up subjecting myself to unintentionally. Right? And there can always be a debate about that as well. Because again, I do think that kids being introduced to porn, and the biggest thing that I have against, because I don't have anything inherently against porn as an example, or just or adult entertainment, whatever you want to call it. Maybe that'll get me in trouble, I don't know, whatever. Trying to be just real about it. I don't inherently see a real issue with it outside of it creating a reality that is not real. You know what I mean? Along with like learning your body and all these other things, like it just becomes a very open conversation, or an interesting conversation nonetheless, and a very one side or the other. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing. It is very all over the place, and it does depend on your personal situation. For me, that is the best evidence that I can give, is you have to evaluate it based on where you feel like you and your kids are at that point in time. The biggest thing for me is that you cannot hide the world from your kids. At some point, they're going to be exposed to it, and either if you hold off on it until they graduate high school, as an example, and then you allow them to have all this information dumped on them, I think that can be just as much of an issue later on as it can be earlier on, right? How they deal with these different things and everything. It should be a lot at one time, right? Like as a dude, there's a lot of there's girls who were secluded or grew up in religious families or whatever the case may be, who didn't have a chance to get outside like that. And these are even in other examples as well, that you see this drastic change. The main thing that I can say as a parent, especially growing up in this more online era, is put your people on game. Put your kids on game. Tell them, hey, you try to limit things within reason. Yes, trust is a major thing, right? And with kids, with teens especially, they're going to bend the truth. They're going to find ways to get around things. And fortunately or unfortunately, we are in an era where you want to be able to access them, right? So it's like, they get involved with after school programs, or they get friends, or whatever the case may be, because the world has gotten so crazy. And it does feel like a lot of people cannot trust even their neighbor nowadays. Whereas like with me, maybe there was a lot of that stuff going on back then, but it did feel, again, in that era of when I was going outside. And again, I do feel like I'm part of the last generation that really feels like, knows what outside was like. But it felt like there was a little bit more protection back then than there is even now, unfortunately. Now, again, that could just be, a sign of the times, everything being more social, everything being more online, where we just see it more, and it existed then. I can see that. I think there's multiple sides of the coins that have to be kind of understood. But overall, like, the best way to do it is to just take steps with it. Hey, I'm gonna allow you to have this form of access, and then expand it out from there, and then say, all right, I'm gonna give you this form of access, and just kind of try to be as aware as possible. Because the other thing too is, there is some form of privacy that you also want your kid to have, right? But at the same time, there is no privacy. You know what I mean? Like, if there's a situation that happens, I need that info. You know what I mean? But in the same breath, like, unless you keep them to certain apps or whatever the case, and again, these kids are going to find out ways to get around things. And if you're not technologically savvy, the only thing that you could do is possibly try to ban them just off the internet completely. And that's just so unrealistic in today's modern era, that you could do detrimental harm to them on the back end of, if you choose to go that direction. So the biggest thing, I think, for me, and I'm still trying to figure it out, I don't know what exactly all the answers are. I do know that I just can't intentionally try to hide everything. The best thing that I can do, because especially when they become teens, they're going to have certain interests, they're going to have certain feelings, and if you want to try to suffocate those things and have them never acknowledge that, especially around you as their parents, I think that can cause an issue as well. I think you should be able to have those conversations, be some form of open, but with respect. You know what I mean? Everything's within respect. If you paying the bill, then you have the overall say so. Point blank, period. Even if you weren't paying the bill and they had a way to pay it themselves, again, they living in your home, you have the overall say so, at least in my mind. I may not be 100% accurate or right on that either, but it's just, it's one of those where you have to just be engaged in constant conversation and reminding your kids, like, and your partner or whoever that you're involved with, your family or whatever, be like, yo, these are kind of my expectations. This is what I want to see. Keep your personal business offline. You know what I mean? Just because you don't want any of that to come back on you. Taking pictures of yourself, giving people your personal information. Like, you want to try to alleviate that as much as possible until you get to a point, and even as an adult, a lot of adults don't like to have their personal information out there like that. A lot of people don't like showing their face like that. You know what I mean? People like myself, I don't necessarily care, because I've always had my face out there in front of people. So it's like, doing it to this is, of course, different, but I don't know, man. It's not a one size fits all. You have to figure out, once again, what feels like it fits for your situation. I do think a slow rollout of things is one of the better ways to do it. But again, the main thing is just have a genuine conversation, saying, hey, you need to be aware of these things, constantly putting them on game, and just kind of going from there. And then when you see certain things, you say, yo, I need to check to see what you're doing. And you can tell, like, again, like people like myself, I can tell when messages and stuff have been deleted and you've been doing whatever the case. So it's like, just kind of take your personal experience, combine it with things that you have learned up to this point, and figure out what the best route is. That's my advice so far. But anyway, much love. Still rain out. Teaser 7 everywhere, baby.